Do you have a marker?
Yeah.
Great.
Cool. Okay, so my name is Dan. I'm the president here at the Student Union.
And I'm Andrew, and I work for the Equity and Accessibility Office. It's a DSU office.
Cool. And lately, we've heard quite a bit of conversation around the proposed University Avenue protected bike lanes. So much so that we figured, it would be a good idea to host sort of like an open public town hall to kind of go over what the projected sort of project is, and kind of highlight some of the things that we've heard from the membership, and get your folks' input on the project and how you feel about it.
Yeah, so I think basically what we're going to do is just do this as an introduction. Then we're going to work on a list of things that people want to talk about. And we're going to give a brief presentation just about what we know thus far. We've been in meetings with counselors and folks at the planning department at Dalhousie.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, the people that were involved in preparing the project and now carrying the project out. Both municipal level and university level. So.
Yeah, and I mean, there are only a few of us here, so probably more of a discussion than anything.
It was just kind of awesome because I like those better, anyways. So.
A discussion with microphones.
Discussion with microphones. Cool. Yeah. I can go handle the switching, or we can just talk about it here, and then I can get up and go switch.
Yeah, we can switch off even.
Yeah, whatever. Okay. So I suppose let's just dive right into it. So what we have it here up on there is, what is it? So it's a protected bike lane, and it'll be running on both sides of University Avenue. And so a protected bike lane, what that means is it'll be like a sectioned off portion of each side of University Avenue, and there will be these post-like things called bollards, and so that will separate the bikers or whoever's using these transportation lanes from oncoming traffic or any traffic at all, actually. Proposed to run. Oh yeah, so it's proposed to run just. It's about 4 blocks from LeMarchant Street, so right behind this building, all the way down to Robie, and it'll cut off at the archives, the Halifax archives section, and it won't run all the way to Robie because specifically the Halifax archives asked to not have the bike lane in front of their building. So that is the reason why it's not running to Robie Street all the way.
And they're going to keep having one accessible spot in front of their building, which we'll talk a little bit more about later.
Yeah, we'll get into that. And then the hope is that after this 1 to 2 year pilot, that this bike lane will continue on past Robie Street, all the way down through to Morris, and all the way down to is it Hollis that is the cross?
I think so.
Yeah, I think it's Hollis that's the cross. And so they're calling that the University Morris Corridor. And it's part of the wider active transportation plan of Halifax. So that's what they're hoping to achieve after this pilot year or two.
Yeah, so the plan came about via a 2010 master plan by Dalhousie University and a 2012 plan by that group that you just mentioned.
The active transportation group? Yeah.
I will... It needs a password.
Are folks here familiar with the bike lane project already? A little bit? Okay. That's... See if it's going to ruin your life. We have definitely heard that opinion. That's for sure.
Okay, so we have a kind of the proposed area on this screen right now. Essentially what we're looking at is that red area is everywhere that the bike lane is going to be. And I know it's tough to see because it's a little far away, but there are like white lines painted on. Essentially that's what they're going to be doing is painting on white lines, and then even more difficult to see, there are those little black dots. Those are the bollards that folks are talking about. And again, it doesn't, so over here would be the University U-turn in front of the Killam, and then all the way down into the archives.
Also, I think also important to note on this diagram are the spaces. So they've allotted for what they call drop-off spaces, right in front of each of the buildings, so that it will allow a car, truck, van, any sort of vehicle to kind of pull in, drop something off. Someone can unload their things, and then providing enough space for cars to then pull back out of the protected bike lane section. I wonder, do we want to go through the whole presentation and then talk about what we've heard, like in terms of feedback? Does that make more sense?
I don't know.
How do folks feel about that? Or we can talk about.
I think it's good, first
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That sounds good.
I will hit the next slide.
Oh, 3D infographic there.
This is the one that they've been using on Shape Your City and that Dal has been using on its website. This is the front of the sub, kind of details what this block will look like and pretty much every other block. So you've got turning space, you've got like 5, 6 bollards, you've got like the drop-off space, 5, 6 bollards, and that's pretty much every block looks similar to this one.
Except for the final block in front of the archives. So this year, when we started first hearing some of the concerns by the membership, we took immediate sort of actions. So we reached out to Wei Mason, who is the District 7 councillor. We're currently in District 7, and he has been the main sort of proponent or the main advocate for the bike lanes. So we wanted to reach out to him and sort of like, hey, did you know that our membership has these kind of concerns, or these things are coming up as problems? Have you heard of them? Do you have a response for them? Have they been considered or anything? And so that was in mid-June. So we received a reply at the end of June, and set up a meeting with him early in July. And then we brought his response and some of those concerns to our Grand Council, and that was also in July. But because we only have one council meeting per month in the summer, just because the numbers are low, and generally there's less activity during the summer. And it just so happened that that item on the agenda in July was pushed to August because one of the main councillors who wanted to speak towards speak in that discussion couldn't make it in July. So then we had the discussion in August, and here we are in September. So that's sort of just like a very loose timeline of how things have progressed. Okay, organic concerns. Cool. I always like that term. Came up organically. So some concerns that we had heard. If this bike lane were to be implemented, would that be taking up any green space? Would we lose any of the trees on University Avenue? Would we lose any walking space? And the short answer to that was no. There was no real planned loss of green space. The only space that we would be losing in terms of walking space, included with this bike lane project, was the creation of new ramps to go up onto the sidewalk from the street. So they call them curb ramps, I believe, or something of that nature. Curb cuts, yeah. So new curb cuts. Oh, hello, welcome. New curb cuts. So that would potentially cut into some of these small patches of green space that are kind of like scattered through some of the side streets, and even that isn't like a for sure planned part of the project.
Hey. We're doing a live feed, which is why we have microphones that aren't doing anything. And right now we're going through the present. Like, we have a little presentation, and it's just kind of on what the implementation would look like, some concerns that we've already heard, and moving forward.
Yeah, and this is for the proposed University Avenue bike lanes, by the way.
I'm just going to go back one slide, just for a brief moment. Are you folks familiar with this?
I've never seen an actual diagram. I've heard it, just by word of mouth.
Okay.
But I've never seen an actual diagram of what's going to be moved where or whatever.
Okay, so there are 2 or 3 diagrams that we're going to show. This one is the plan for the University Avenue bike lane, and on the side closer to us, that would be the intersection with Robie. And the other, it ends at LeMarchant, so the University U is not included in this.
What's at the far right end? What's that building at the end?
This one?
Yeah.
I believe that would be the Halifax Archives, and so they have requested that the bike lane does not move in front of their building, and there is one accessible parking spot here that they would like to protect. So the bike lane will not extend to in front of their building. So that's why this portion here, this white portion, cuts off right at the front of their building.
So it's kind of difficult to see. The diagrams aren't super great. The white lines that you see on there will be painted on. And then there are these little tiny black dots. They're called bollards, and they are removable, like, separators that are going to be drilled into the ground. And pretty much every block follows the same kind of situation where you have like a painted white line, then you're going to have 5 or 6 of those bollards. The middle of each block then has a drop-off zone. The drop-off zone is either for people or for goods. So the idea is that there's enough space for some type of vehicle to come in, park, unload, and then exit.
Which buildings will those be in front of or beginning of?
Those the unload drop off points, you mean? According to this diagram, they will be in front of every building. It just so happens that this one, I believe, so that's a Rebecca Cohen. There will be a small drop off spot at the very beginning of the section, as well as in the middle. And then here's the Weldon. So the drop-off point will be at the very beginning of Weldon. And then there's also another drop-off point right here. And that, yeah.
So what is the space, like the drop-off points? What is the width of those, is a regular size vehicle pull in there? Can they pull into the curb? Or do they have to remain a certain distance from the curb due to the restrictions of the bars that are going to be there?
Sure. So just for the folks on the live stream, the question was how close to the curb can vehicles pull in, and can a full-size vehicle pull in? Is that sort of the general sense of the question? That's.
Trying to get a sense of what is the space in feet or meters between the end of one set of bars and the beginning of the next set of bars.
Right.
How much space is there for a
That's a good question. I don't think I have a figure specifically of how much feet. I know that there will be enough space for a full-sized van or SUV, like a large vehicle, to pull in and get completely parallel. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like completely parallel, and then have a little bit of room in front and behind to maneuver and pull back out. But I don't have a specific.
See, I'm just wondering if there's enough space there for the excess of us to pull into the curb there.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And did we end up getting an answer on that?
I don't remember if we got an answer from that. That was one of the questions that we did pose to one of the planners at Dalhousie about it, and I can't remember the exact answer.
I remember when we were saying, if folks need an accessible bus, will this hinder like the drop off, or will people still be able to be dropped off? And like, will there be enough space? And the response, I think, was there. Like, if they need an accessible bus, there won't be any disturbance of like accessible bus access. But there was no. Yeah, I don't think he said whether or not an accessible bus would be able to fit in there. But the quote was there won't be a disturbance in accessible bus use or access.
One thing you might want to bring up is that quote that you said is up here. If they drop us off to the street, this summer that's all well and good. But in the winter, I don't know if you know this, getting around in winter, in the wintertime, kind of sucks. So if you're going on foot, you'd like the great trek through the Arctic. So the further away they are from 130 for people with accessibility issues to participate fully in the Dutch society.
Yeah, absolutely. During the winter, that's been one of the other major concerns is how if we are going to have protected bike lanes in there, especially given the very harsh winters, like the danger of ice, or just like the difficulty of like mobility. Like, how is that being addressed, and what is that going to look like? And I think that's an absolutely valid concern. And something that our understanding, or at least my understanding, was that accessible bus, like in terms of accessible bus drop-offs, folks would still be dropped off at the same access points as currently.
Okay, well then that would be fine. Yeah, Freud. If they're like, yeah, it'll be accessible to drive on, but it'll be like
Somewhere else down the street, yeah.
streetways. Like I would be able to track through that, like, unless I hire the entire Dow Tiger team to take care of the trip, which sounds kind of hot, but it'd be really, really difficult. Ugh.
Reduces management, but I think the question is also the difference between if you're being dropped off at the same location and the accessible bus will drop you off directly on the sidewalk versus dropping you off.
Just off of the sidewalk.
That would be quite different in winter time, right?
Absolutely.
Is there a curb cut in front of these white spaces? Because they have to lower their ramp. And if they can't pull up directly parallel to the curb, they're not going to be able to lower their ramp unless there's a curb cut there.
Right.
So, it would just be helpful to know the dimensions of these designated spaces, and also, are the snowbanks going to be cleared?
Right.
Because if there's snowbanks, hindering the access to these white areas, they're not going to be able to pull in there and disembark passengers and pick up passengers. So,
Yeah, absolutely. That's so when we had also asked a very similar question regarding snowbanks and like how that will be addressed, and I think our questions were more on snow removal of like the side streets where new accessible parking spots would be placed, and the response that we got was snow removal will be a top priority and snowbanks will be cut down. Now my understanding of where curb cuts are is that like if there's a curb cut, then there like will not be a snowbank because that like the snowbank will be removed. But but that's like absolutely the Weldon building.
I mean, okay, there is the curb cut insofar as at the corner, but directly in front of the building, there is no curb cut.
Okay.
So if you go down to the exact corner, there is a curb cut there for pedestrians, but there is no curb cut within the boundaries of that white space
Right.
that is depicted in front of the law building.
Right.
There's no curb cut there, so the access bus would have to be
On the corner.
pull up directly to the curb
So
over its ramp.
So I think that wherever they put in an unload spot or a cut in between the bollards, there are the curb cuts. In front of the Weldon, I think you're correct. I don't think there are any curb cuts here
No, there's along the entire length, there are curb cuts obviously
at
at the corner.
the corners.
However, an additional question is, what happens if the space is occupied, if the access bus has to drop someone off, and the space is occupied by, whatever, a truck unloading supplies or what have you? What happens then?
Absolutely.
Who gets priority to park there?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question.
So that question, just for live feed viewers, was who gets priority if there's already some type of truck there? Do people get priority, or do goods and services? We don't have an answer for that.
I also think that is the Weldon Law Building. If anybody here knows, and I think I do know this, the accessible entrance that on the side of the building.
It's on Edward Street, and it's under the areas under construction right now. It's very difficult to access. I'm taking across there actually.
Others.
It's on the other side.
This one?
And it's all scaffolding surrounding the entrance right now, and so it is quite awkward and difficult, and it has been a long construction process that has been going on over there, especially on the side of the building. It's just an absolute mess there.
I wonder if we can just take a quick aside. In terms of that entrance, is there anything that you see could be like immediately resolved to enhance accessibility to that building while it's under construction?
Not really, because to access the, they have it partitioned off. So a person using a wheelchair has to go down a sort of narrow, well, and anyone entering the building.
Right.
On foot or in a wheelchair for that matter. However, the problem is, as well, is where they have one of these round things built into the wall that you push an activator for the door, but the problem is when you go to push it, the door is opening. You can't move your wheelchair fast enough to, get out of the way of the opening door. So, again, this construction over there, particularly at the side of the building there where the scaffolding is, it's been going on forever. It's just quite rather amazing that, it's taking them so long to get that.
Do we know why that is?
Right.
Why?
Is there a reason that people know why it's taking so long? And secondly, I know more doors than that open outward rather than inward.
Mhm.
Just to let you know. For future reference, accessible doors shouldn't do that because it can be very dangerous. I've actually, not here, but in other places where the door has done that, broken my foot because
Yeah.
the door's hit it.
Yeah, I have definitely, because
not
when I
good.
go to open that door, I've just got to move my wheelchair as fast as I can because it opens automatically, and in order to access the button, you're sort of in front of the door.
Yeah.
Are you close to the district union button?
Yes, yeah. So, yeah. So Andrew works in. Sorry, I realized that we did intros at the beginning and not after that. So I'm Dan. I'm the president here at the Student Union.
And I'm Andrew, and I work at the Equity and Accessibility Office.
So just to touch on this. So any questions asked here that maybe we don't have an answer for? One, we're going to follow up with the relevant people and get answers to the questions. But also, we're going to post all of the questions up on not only I would say probably on the Facebook page where the event was, and maybe on YouTube. I guess yesterday's question or at the anyways. They will be posted and made public, as well as the answers that we get to these questions. So.
I have another comment to make with respect to these designated blocked off white spaces. Is there going to be a handicap symbol there to denote, to anyone wishing to park there, knowing that it is designated for the accessible also for handicapped access, or is it just a free for all? Whoever wants to pull in first come first served.
Yeah, so the question was, is there going to be any designated markers at the drop-off points in front of the buildings, in between the bollards, to symbolize that those spots are for folks with accessibility needs? My understanding is that no, there will not be any denoted markers showing that. And it's like further to that, I think that those are just going to be open drop-off points that folks will be able to pull in, drop off, unload, and then leave, but not for any like prolonged duration of time.
Clear signage there saying, parking for X number of minutes, say.
That's a good question. I would imagine so, but I don't have a definitive answer. So something that we can follow up on and get an answer for you.
Now, with the side streets, I don't see it clearly indicated where the handicap parking spaces, the existing handicap parking spaces are going to be relocated. Can you tell us more about this?
I think we have another diagram.
We have another slide that details that exactly what you just asked.
Yeah. Any other questions based on this diagram before we move forward?
Okay, so the question was, is the reason why it's so short because the archives didn't want it to go in front of it? From our understanding, that is it.
So as simple as that.
That someone working within the archives or who regularly uses the archives had enough power and pressure to stop the bike lane, have that accessible spot, and then that's kind of it.
I actually think there are two, if I'm remembering correctly, accessible parking spaces in front of the archives. And I can understand why they would object to having those removed, because it would require a relocation of at least 100 feet around the corner, going down to the corner, and then, the first possible spot to relocate would entail at least 100 to 125 feet distance away. Yeah.
So just for folks on the live feed, the comment was that right now there are two spots in front of the NS archives, and that a relocation would mean more, probably like 100, 125, 150 feet to another spot. That is totally correct. They are losing one of those spots, though. They are, to the best of my knowledge, they are only having one accessible spot during the implementation of the university protected bike lane.
I think there's one spot that's up and around this area, and then there's also one spot in.
It's directly, you can see the front access to the building, right directly in front. You can see the sidewalk going right there. Okay, the two spots are directly on either side of that entrance sidewalk. Yeah.
Okay.
So are there any more questions just relating to this slide?
Just a brief comment. The Weldon Law Building, it seems like this spot is as far away as possible
So that comment was just that in front of the Weldon Law Building, the actual drop-off location is about as far away as can be.
And yeah, so if the accessible parking or accessible entrance is on this side and the drop-off is here, clearly it is quite a distance. I think this is also another drop-off point. There's quite a big distance between the beginning of the bollards and the beginning of the curb here, as well as it'll be highlighted on another slide where the new accessible parking spots will be, and I think there will be 2 new accessible parking spots implemented on Edward Street, but I think it'll be more clear in terms of where things will be on the other diagram. This is it's a little tiny diagram.
So this is just the diagram of what it will look like in front of the Student Union building. And again, it's got those like 5 or 6 bollards. Then there's that space to turn in, and then 5 or 6 more. So that is the entire block. I don't think it's like true to size.
The way that that's depicted on that slide, I can't envisage how a vehicle could pull into the curb there.
I'm not entirely sure if it is true to size.
I mean, the response that we got was that a car or a large-sized vehicle would be able to pull in and pull out. So that would be the most that we know about it. I have it written down. We can definitely work to getting specific dimensions, just so the numbers are very clear, and that is something that we'll make available, or that we'll look to get it. So. So this is just a slide showing a few of the concerns that had just come up. Some of our members just coming to the office and saying, "Hey, this bike lane thing's happening. These are some concerns that we have. Have you received any information about these, or do you know anything about them?" So the first one, recession of green space. So some folks were concerned about the implementation of a bike lane, and would that cut into the sidewalks or walking space, but would that also cut into any of the green space or any of the trees that we have planted on University Avenue? We brought that up, and the answer we got was no. There are no planned losses of green space. And I was kind of touching on this earlier. The only potential that we saw anyways for loss of green space was the implementation or the inclusion of new curb cuts. That's what it was, right? New curb cuts that may eat into some of the individualized potted trees or planted trees on some of the side streets. But even then, the answer we received was, "Oh no, that's not being planned for. That's not what's planned." So that was one of the first concerns. The second one was the accessible parking, and this one was by far the largest concern that we've heard thus far. So included in accessible parking, direct access to buildings, snow removal for side streets, and the grade of side streets. So folks were concerned that if the accessible parking spots that are generally in front of buildings, which have direct access to the accessible doors, which are usually on the front of buildings, if we're moving the accessible parking spots to side streets, how is that going to influence access to the buildings? And so as you'll see in either the next slide or the slide after, we can go through where the new parking spots are going to be versus where they were or where they are currently, sorry. Sure.
This is sideways for some reason.
I can point as you talk.
Okay. Yeah.
I agree.
I think they are labeled in what looks to be absolutely tiny font. So incredibly difficult to read.
So this one I believe is the Rebecca Cohen. This one is the Weldon Law. I believe, and then archives, computer science, the
Row building.
the Row building, the Student Union building, and then the McCain, and then the U that's right in front of the Killam Library,
And the
which is
U
down
is
here.
cut off. So what we're looking at are the red spaces are the accessible parking spaces that exist currently.
Yes.
And those blue spaces are the spaces that are going to be like relocated.
And then also we have down here the green spaces, which are in their eyes additions or additional spaces. So there will be five new accessible spots placed into the U in front of the Killam. They were supposed to be metered spots. One of the questions was, why are they metered? Like, why aren't they just free spots? So we brought that up, and we're just like, well, folks don't want to pay for accessible parking. Like, it's it's a necessity, and it needs to happen. So those are now they're just planned to be unmetered parking spots in the U if this project was to go forward. This one here.
So the red in front of the McCain is the existing spot. Where's that going to be moved?
So that is essentially what's happening is not that they are going to be moved to like the closest possible option, but what is happening to our knowledge is that they will, for the most part, they will be moved into the University U. So cut off from that, there are 5 parking spots, right?
It's going to be moved over to the U-shaped.
Yeah, so it's quite like it'll be a bit of a distance. Like it's pretty far away.
The parking spot in front of the sub, where's that going to be shifted?
Down to right here in between the sub and the row building.
On the row side of the street?
On the row side of the street.
So the one in front of the McCain and in front of the sub are both going to be eliminated. One's going to be moved over to the U-shaped parking lot. The other is at the side of the road. So my next question is Dalhousie responsible for the side streets, or is it only responsible for clearing snow in front of the building?
So that's a good question, and just a little bit of an addition to that. So these University Avenue is considered a Class 1 snow removal street, so it takes priority versus the side streets, which is considered a Class 2 or a Class B, which is like not obviously lower on the priority list. So one of the main questions that we had was, so if you're now moving accessible parking spots to a lower class priority street, how are you going to address that? Because not only are the spots further away from the entrances, but now if there's snow there, that's going to increase difficulty significantly.
Is Dalhousie responsible for clearing the sidewalk on the side streets? Along the boundary, say, of the row building.
Yeah, so Dal is responsible for clearing the sidewalks, but the streets themselves, those are like city removal techniques. Yes, but the response that we got was that the side streets or wherever there's accessible parking takes the highest priority of snow removal, and that was the response that we got to that. So that may or may not be true in reality or how things are actually carried out.
The thing is, it's not going to take this. It's not going to be given the same priority as the tier 1.
As the main road.
So it's going to be problematic because last year, for example, was just terrible. The snow clearance was just absolutely in the city. And so by moving, Dalhousie does a first-class job of keeping its sidewalks clear. It's the best, area of the entire city in terms of keeping its sidewalks clear. But once we're relocating something to the side streets, you're facing significant barriers there, for sure.
And
So it is a reduction in accessibility, as it's depicted there on the diagram.
Yeah, so you said bring that up, it's like, please don't move the spots, or please just make that little space, class 1 or class A or however they put it. Like, I understand side streets are class B, but those particular spaces on those side streets should be class A. Because you're limiting access to education for disabled people. But when you put it like that, which you should put it like that, no one's gonna agree to that. No one's gonna be like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, and also, who's ever parking in these disabled parking spots is going to have to navigate more curb cuts as well. I know to people who don't have to deal with these issues, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but trust me, it's a really big deal when you have limited mobility, and this city, you cannot put any faith into what they're saying about we're going to give this, higher priority. I don't believe that for one moment. I'm sorry.
Okay, so yeah, like absolutely something that we can take up the line. Yeah.
One of the problems with the snow clearing was because of the parked cars. And you're going to find that University Avenue will be clearer now because they can clear right to the curb every time, and then Val will clear the front. So I mean, as far as getting to the front of the building will be better. And before, you could hardly get by even the buses because of the cars that were parked in front of the sub. But I think you'll find it will be easier for them to clear.
Yeah, so it might be easier for them to clear. Can you just hit the computer thing? Yeah, so in terms of the university, Avenue aspect of things, I think you're probably right in saying it will be easier for them to clear the entire street without the parking there. But then I guess that sort of leads into the question on the side streets. If there are still cars parked on the side streets, does that pose an issue for clearing, just as it would on the University Avenue? I suppose.
I would assume that the accessible parking will be at the front of the line.
Yes. Yeah. It.
Closest spots to University.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think one of our major concerns when we saw this, and like one of the concerns that has been raised, is this concern of curb cuts. And that was one of the things that we brought forward to the planning group committee.
Yeah, because I've got to run, but what I find most problematic about this is the removal of the parking space which is presently directly in front of the McCain building. And I just would like to note that the parking spot in front of the sub has been there for literally decades. And now to take that away, there has to be a really compelling justification to do that. I used to park there when I still was able to drive my car, park there all the time. And it's going to create significant hardship. And I would also just like to very briefly comment that I know that Councillor Mason is very much in favor of this. However, simply the act of sending an email, say to an advisory committee at HRM and saying to them, are you okay with this? That is not consultation. They can't speak to this unless they are thoroughly briefed on the both past and future implications of this proposal. It's going to be a deterioration in many respects of accessibility. So that is something that has to be thoroughly debated, and unless there's a compelling justification location to do that. I think it is discriminatory to move some of these parking spaces.
Have they thought about making cut-ins on the curbside for the accessible parking, say in front of the McCain?
So the question was, have they considered making cut-ins into the cement concrete place? Unsure. I think that's an excellent suggestion, and something that we can also bring back to this planning committee and say, hey, have you thought about this? Has this been considered? But thank you for that. No, no, absolutely. Thank you very much for your input. And this is exactly why we. Yeah, no, this is exactly why we host these kind of things. So, thank you so much.
Thanks.
So, were there any other questions in terms of this diagram here that's here? One other, just before I switch slides, one other thing that's been brought up by the university themselves was that if more accessible parking spots are required, they are okay with that. They just kind of ask that we bring that up and just say, okay, if you need more spots, then let us know. One of the biggest things, or one of the biggest challenges, or concerns that have been voiced, is not necessarily the number of parking spots, but the location of the parking spots. So that's just something to keep in mind.
I'm more worried about location than the number. I mean, more is always better. If you can drop me off on the sidewalk, that's great. But if I can't actually get into the building, then there is no point.
Yeah, there's no point in having 10 accessible parking spots, 7 blocks away from a building you need to get to, in place of one yeah.
Nova Scotia in January.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that is one of our biggest concerns at the moment, is just like what does the relocation look like? Where are those spaces being relocated to? And is it fair? And I think the really difficult part of the bike lane project is that it isn't fair.
It's totally not.
And especially during the winter when, as the person who just left was speaking of, I don't know if these spaces will be cleared right away, and it's how do we keep the university accountable to that promise.
So I think that one of the biggest things that we're trying to accomplish is to gauge all of the all of the concerns and try to find some sort of acceptable solution, or some sort of whether it be curb cut-ins, which is an idea that I haven't heard of yet until you brought that up. So thank you for that. Or whether it's some other magical solution that has yet to be brought up. That's sort of where we're trying to get to, and if we can't get to that, then obviously we can't advocate that we move forward, or that we support something that moves forward that is unfair or unjust.
Basically, my main concerns are not being like being able to go to school, but then has a bunch of people go, we can't drop you off. So I miss class simply because there isn't a spot to park. Or like getting to park there and everything's fine. And the curb cut's there, but there's no one. So yeah, they can drop the ramp or whatever, but my chair is not a tank. It cannot fall over his bank. And there's only so much pushing you can do before it is pointless.
Yeah, exactly, and those are the types of concerns that.
I don't want to feel like a second-class citizen, which is what this is making me feel like.
Okay, thank you for that. So that's exactly what we're trying to sort of gauge, or that's what we're trying to bring up to the university planners as well as sort of the city planners. So.
Next time you have a meeting with whatever that is, please bring up the point of second-class citizenship, because I use a lot of big words that have a lot of negative connotations, but that's because when you try to sugarcoat something, they don't realize it's as bad as it is, because they don't take it seriously.
Okay.
Now they gotta go for clear, or they're not gonna get it.
Thank you for that.
Not in a rude way, just like, this is how it is. And then you can do it if you're still not getting it.
I'll tell them I have Vicky's permission to be rude, so that's what I'll tell them.
They know who I am.
So to keep in mind, just as I mentioned earlier, the university has committed to adding more accessible parking spots if requested, but we touched on why that still poses an issue. As you know, it's not really quantity; it's more of quality and where the location of those spots are. We also requested, like I touched on earlier as well, the unmetered accessible parking spaces in the U. So if this project were to move forward, that is one thing that would be included. And we also requested that curb ramps or curb cuts be installed closer to the new parking spaces, which they also said, "Oh, okay, no problem, of course." So those are just three times that we had brought certain concerns to the university, and they had accepted them and moved forward. So it kind of presents us with a little bit of hope that if we bring more concerns to them, or say like, hey, this is still an issue, or this is an issue, that they would be willing to address those concerns. Okay, so that's it for just that presentation, and I think now we're going to move into just more of a discussion, if folks are into that, or are you okay with that, Andrew?
I'm okay with it. Are
Yeah.
folks okay with the discussion?
All right.
Thanks.
Okay, so in terms of the presentation that we just kind of went through, was there anything in there that, was there anything that wasn't in there, actually, is probably a better way to go about things, or do folks have other concerns that we still haven't touched on?
Simple question. What is the proposed timeline? What is the imagined implementation? What have they set aside as consultation? They're open to planning. When does a shovel go in the dirt?
The microphone is on, but only for the live feed. We have a live feed going as well. So microphone's on for the live feed. So if you're not comfortable speaking into the microphone, that's cool. We can just kind of.
We can just cover the questions or reiterate the questions for the folks in the live feed.
I just asked what timeline was there on this? Is there a clear timeline when the university and the city would like to start building? Is there set aside a year of consultation, open to planning, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so there was a consultation session that did happen. I believe it was March the 11th, and I know it was planned to go from 4 o'clock until 8 o'clock p.m. somewhere here on campus. I believe it was the LeMarchant Place building, but I hadn't heard of that until after the fact, and I was also informed that was during one of the big snowstorm periods. So unsure about the attendance there. We were assured by some other folks that the attendance was fine and that they received enough feedback to call it a meaningful consultation. But we've heard contrary from members of from our membership. So one of the reasons why we wanted to hold this event, but also I think one of our recommendations is that the university hold another consultation session, one that might be more accessible and not during the middle of a snowstorm. In terms of timeline, I believe that they had planned to have this project done and finished already, but there have been various members of the public who have sort of taken the project and said, hey, like these issues are unacceptable. Like you can't ignore these issues. So I want to make like a public informal complaint or a public informal stop to the process until we can deal with these issues. So right now there is currently an active standing injunction against moving forward on the project that I believe will be dealt with, or at least the court date is set for October 21st, 2nd.
Something around there in late October.
Yeah, something in late October. So another reason why we kind of wanted to hear what some of our members were saying before that date, just so we can either chime in and add our voice or yeah. Anything else that we didn't cover in the presentation? Any other concerns or questions, comments?
Just a matter of curb cuts, because I've noticed this at university. Sort of curb cuts are what I like to call ramps of death, because they're very steep, and it's actually kind of dangerous to go down them. So my only request would be whatever these new curb cuts are, is there anything, like any way do you plan to have somebody in a wheelchair, for example, who would use the curb cuts to sort of consult on that, to say, yes, this ramp or this curb cut is up to code, or no, that's actually dangerous?
Okay, so having someone who would use these curb cuts on a daily basis, sort of be involved in the planning process, or be involved at least in the like approval of the types of curb cuts, or say the grade or the steepness of the curb cuts. Okay.
Because the one that goes from, to, or not goes from, but goes to the code, on like Robie LeMarchant to the code, between those two, it's very dangerous. I actually have to lift my chair up, or the foot plate will get caught on the ground, and I couldn't give over if it was to go fast enough.
Just briefly on that, is it that the curb cut is too steep, or is there a lip or something?
It's just because it's a big dip. So you go down it, like right where you cross to go to code, go down it, and the curve is, or the incline is so steep that it, like, my chair will hit the bottom.
It's not gradual enough.
No, it's actually really scary.
So just for folks watching, the concern is that some of the curb cuts that we have right now the gradual is actually too steep for folks in a chair to get up or down without needing some type of assistance or needing to lift up like a foot rest.
Yeah, I'm lucky in the fact that my chair can tilt. A lot of wheelchairs can't, and especially when you're dealing with pushing wheelchairs, so manual chairs, it's harder to control speed. So if you were to go down that gradient in a manual chair, God be with you if you're going flying.
Okay, so that's very helpful feedback, and something that we can press on and we can advocate like, hey, can we check this out? Can we look at it? Can we get it fixed? That's excellent. Thank you so much. So moving forward, I think what we want to look at, or what we want to try and focus on, like I sort of touched on earlier, is are there any solutions that we can come up with, or any sort of ideas that we can focus on to make this project more accessible, friendly, or just and right, I suppose, would be how I would put it.
Yeah, what are folks' needs when it comes to this project?
Just keep an eye and make sure that people with disabilities can actually get to where they need to go and aren't forced to trek through the 100-acre wood, as it were, to just live daily lives.
Okay, so priorities like ensuring that folks have direct access to accessible buildings seems to be like one of the number one priorities. Yeah. Okay.
Corner ramps that they have. The new corner ramps that they have, that where they're completely graded all the way around, are so much better.
They are.
And in the
Yeah.
winter, they are so much easier to clear, because if it's only like a narrow cut for a chair to go through, then they can't clear those out, and you'll find in the winter that it's just a pit of mush to get through. So if they're going to put the accessible parking spots on the side street, having those kind of corners would make it, everything be able to be cleared so much better.
Right. So the full corner curb cut, essentially. Okay.
The way I see it, the bigger the curb cut, the better. Because I mean, people without disabilities can walk up a curb cut no problem. But if you don't make that curb cut smooth enough or wide enough, then you're actually putting people with wheelchairs at risk.
Okay. What I just want to pose a question. What do folks think about I'm just so fascinated about this idea of like the cutting into the curbs. What do folks think about that idea of having various accessible spots cut into the curbs so that you could still have a protected bike lane, but then maybe like how there are the drop-off spots, maybe inside those drop-off spots, you could have an accessible parking spot, or not necessarily in those drop-off spots, but you could have an accessible parking spot that's cut into the curb, as to still allow for some sort of protected bike lane.
I agree with that. I think that's a good idea.
I guess it seems like a good idea. I think it may come in conflict with the kind of the loss of green space. I mean, the way I'm imagining what you're describing, I think that loss of green space is no great loss compared to what it offers. But I just think if those are one of the things that people raised as a concern, I mean, that could be the only conflict I see. Again, I don't think it's a big issue.
Yeah, so I mean losing, and I mean I'm sure that we could even find some areas where it's just concrete versus like a patch of grass or a full growing tree or something like that.
Sure, the McCain is already has basically.
Yeah, spots like that. Okay.
Just to bring up the green space debacle. I mean, I am a fan of green space. I think the fact that we have green space in this city is beautiful. But I think a person's right to access to their community is much more important than a patch of grass or a tree. People living, as my mother would put it, to be full citizens of the world is much more important than having a tree planted when you could move that tree 3 feet and still have that tree, but also be inclusive of people with disabilities.
Right.
Yeah.
Thoughtful positioning. Interesting. Okay.
I mean, I don't know whose responsibility this kind of thing would be, but I'm just wondering what kind of examination of what other cities, what other areas have done when implementing a kind of serious bike path like this, right? That is permanently separated from the street. I don't know. I mean, I would think that's the planning department, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure there is another place that has probably dealt with this issue than Halifax.
Yeah, somewhere that we could model their plans off of. And I'm sure. Well, not that I'm sure. I know that they did do other research on other models in other cities. I know they specifically wanted to focus on the bike lanes, the protected bike lanes that are in Montreal. But that's a good question that we can definitely dig further into and say, well, how did you deal with accessible parking spaces, or how did they deal with accessible parking spaces in those plans? But that's a good question. Okay, so seeing no other, I guess, comments or suggestions, do you want to move into the second piece, or is it?
I think, no, let's just let's just keep discussion around here. If anyone wants to talk more about like the accessible bike lanes, or accessibility and the bike lanes, let's do that. And if not, maybe we'll end a little bit early. So if anyone has any more concerns or questions or like wants or needs from this project, I think let's chat about them. But if not, maybe we'll just end a little early.
I can't think of any, but if we can't go through, they do it.
And also, I mean, if you do have any other comments that come up at a later time, I mean, we're always open to receiving those kind of comments, whether it's on the Facebook event page or you can always email myself at dsuperez@dal.ca. So I'm always open to that, and Andrew as well.
And I'm also open to that. I'm DSU Equity, so EQUITY@dal.ca.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for coming out to this event. I think we got some excellent ideas and some excellent comments that are going to be important to take up the line and just sort of showcase to the folks that are responsible for planning and implementation of this project.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming out.
Excellent.